lecture to The lecture today is about eating disorders, and we mentioned this last time. So in this lecture, we'll talk about the criteria for eating disorders, the symptoms, and hopefully about prevention, and just kind of get a handle on eating disorders. One thing that's always important to keep in mind is that dietitians or nutritionists that aren't dietitians are not qualified to teach, to cure, or treat eating disorders in and of themselves, because this is a psychological disorder. These are all are psychological disorders. And so nutritionists, dietitians have a seat at the table, and they're critical in providing the medical nutrition therapy and nutrition education. And so they have that piece, but in and of themselves, without a second degree, such as social work or licensed professional counseling, we're not qualified to treat. Yet we need to know about it, because we may be the first people that identify an eating disorder in someone else and can help them locate services and make sure that they're safe. So what are eating disorders? You could probably answer this. There's several different types of eating disorders and characteristics, but basically the severe alterations in eating patterns, such as restricting food, binging, purging, sometimes experience a lot of fluctuations with weight, and also emotional and cognitive changes. And oftentimes people that have eating disorders have comorbidity of depression, right, or mental disorders. And we'll talk about this. They're potentially life-threatening. In particular, anorexia is the most life-threatening mental disorder. And seriously, people have serious effects on their emotional and physical health. So before going any further, I want to be clear about how we differentiate between true eating disorders and disordered eating that doesn't really lend itself to being categorized. So somebody may have a couple of traits that are like an eating disorder, but they're not clinically relevant. So we define eating disorders based on a set of criteria that are included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, called the DSM-5. 5 just means it's a 5th edition, and then they get upgraded every several years. So this book includes a diagnostic criteria for every psychological disorder recognized in the US healthcare system. And so let's talk about these. So here's your categories of eating disorders found in the DSM-5: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and then a category that's kind of a lump all others specified feeding or eating disorders. So we'll go through these methodically. The prevalence of eating disorders, I'm not going to ask you how many millions of people have it. I want you to understand is that it's prevalent, and it's a very large concern. Some people who don't have bona fide eating disorders may struggle with body dissatisfaction, have subclinical disordered eating. The incidence of anorexia has gone up in women, and bulimia has also gone up in women. Men also have eating disorders. They're more common among women, but men also do. And the prevalence is similar among all racial and ethnic groups in the United States. So what a comorbidity is. A comorbidity is a condition that goes along with something like an eating disorder. So some people with eating disorders are more likely to have substance abuse issues. And that doesn't mean everybody does, but alcohol or other substance abuse. And depression and other mood disorders can also co-occur quite frequently with eating disorders. And there's an OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, is also a potential comorbidity. Again, just because these are comorbidities, it doesn't mean every person that is suffering from an eating disorder also has these issues. So this is the part that sort of tugs at our heartstrings. Eating disorders begin early. Sadly, girls start to express concerns about their weight by the age of 6. I'm going to show you a video in a minute just to kind of illustrate why. And half of elementary school girls are concerned about becoming too fat. Normal weight teens view themselves as too heavy. And 50% of teenage girls and nearly a third of teenage boys use unhealthy weight control behaviors: laxatives, vomiting, smoking, skipping meals, dieting, things that are not sustainable, but that can cause physical harm. And frequent dieters are more likely to binge than people that don't diet. So this slide is about eating disorder etiology. And what etiology means is, what are the contributors or causes of eating disorders? And this Venn diagram shows that there's sort of three categories that we can lump together that can explain why people experience eating disorders. And some people are more likely to than others. There's a genetic component for sure, and eating disorders can run in families. And there are genes that affect hunger, satiety, and body weight. So everybody's different. There's also psychological issues: low self-esteem, need for self-control is a big one, and unhealthy body image. Again, there's so much of this going on that's people suffer from that is not even rational, but that the psychological burden of worrying about being attractive and not living up to certain standards can ruin people's lives. There's also the sociocultural aspects. And this is so confusing for everyone. When we have this thin body ideal where the idea is everybody should be thin, and women should be thin and mostly muscular, and men should be thin, and everybody should be this way. And yet we've got so much food in our society. We've got our portion sizes are too big. We all live sedentary jobs. Our food supply is overabundant. And so we're constantly having to battle the huge onslaught of unhealthy foods. At the same time, we're supposed to have this ideal that we're very thin. Now, these are from older slides, or older images, but it gives you an idea of how thinness has become popular over the years and among models. So the body mass index and don't even get me started on pageants, but Miss America winners was 22 in the 1920s and went to 16.9. So the fashion became to be as bone thin and starving as possible. So I want to take a break here and show a couple of films. This is one of my favorite ones. Sorry, I'm going to try to get on YouTube so I can get it bigger. So that one always gives me chills. Any comments about that one before I show the next one? Does that seem like a realistic exposure that girls might get to, and boys to our world today?
That was a really heavy video, but definitely.
You know, little kids know so little about the world, and yet they're exposed to advertising, and it takes them a long time to understand the difference between real information and advertising, especially since they learn from videos so much now. I know a lot of kids during the pandemic have been doing lots of video education, and so how do they know the difference between commercials like this that objectify and make it have a impossible situation, and advocate for the physical body to achieve unachievable status, and this is what they're supposed to do. So it's so confusing for girls and boys. So here's another one. I just like, let's see.
Great quiet, please. Cameras rolling. And recording sound.
So before I keep lecturing, any discussion about any of that? Did y'all know that most of the billboards you see in the magazine, you probably know this, that many images are edited.
I wanted to say that these two videos are actually not even up to date to what's going on right now, because right now I feel like there's actually been a positive movement in the modeling and media world, and where that sort of pervasive imaging is becoming a problem is more like in social media, because you have a lot of like kids that are on like things like TikTok and Instagram and stuff, and the social media influencers and stuff, they're trying to make their real lives look super glamorous, and they use things like Facetune to change the way that they look, their faces and their bodies. And honestly, I feel like that's even more detrimental than watching actresses in a movie, because it's actually making it's actually emulating like a lifestyle versus just something that's fake. So people think, so like young girls and stuff are looking at that, and they're thinking that that's how these people's lives really are, and it's not. It's all fake.
Thank you. I actually have a video here on Facetune tuning. But it takes 18 minutes. So I have it here for anybody to take a look at it on your own time. It just takes a long time, but it gets at what you're talking about. So obviously these are, I agree that they're not like up to the minute, but the concepts are still there and the advertisements are still there, but social media has its own problem as well. I agree with you completely. So if y'all want to know more about Facetune, there's a video right here. Anybody else?
I was gonna say, I almost feel like the problem has gotten worse just because that technology is now available to everyday people. I mean, it's so easy to just like buy an app. I mean, I don't do any of that. I'm like not even really on social media, but I did download an app just to see what I could do, and I was astonished by the manipulations I could do just from the free version. I can't even imagine the paid version.
Oh man, that's such a good point. So I keep looking at this from the standpoint of children, because what we're doing is what they grow into, right? So they see their older siblings do it. They get on social media. The parents probably in many cases don't have TikTok, right? So they don't even look at TikTok, and yet the kids are probably doing that. And so it's the sad. There's so many sad things about it, but one of the biggest issues is that people that get obsessed with their body shape and size can cease to enjoy everything else about life in lieu of working on that ideal, which is not attainable. So, as dietitians or as educated people in nutrition, that's something we can make a difference with. is helping kids understand that these things aren't real. And of course, that gets into all aspects of social media.
Well, and not to mention a lot of the popular apps like Snapchat and not so much TikTok, but I know with Snapchat, a lot of people who grew up with it, you know, during those formative years, that automatically filters you to an extent without you even applying anything of it. And I can't imagine growing up being a 14-year-old girl and like every time I open a camera, that's what I think I look like, is this prettier version of myself. And then I see photos and I'm like, wait a minute. You know, it's just kind of it can mess with you.
And that's a really good point. You know, it's been a really long time since I've been in a school environment, high school or public school environment. My understanding is that it's pretty tough. These issues, these body image issues are pretty tough. And I talk about causes sometimes in here. I want to go ahead and get at this, where we're doing this right now. But for some reason, this lecture often comes up in the fall, comes up right before Thanksgiving. So it's kind of useful because we talk about what it's like to get with families sometimes and how families sometimes feel comfortable making comments about your physical appearance. Has anybody experienced that before?
Yep.
Yeah. Right, you've gained weight, you're too thin, what are you doing? Your comments on your body shape, or look how much you're eating, or look at you, you've lost weight, you look so much better. Those are all damaging comments. They don't have to be negative comments to be damaging. You know why people lose weight? They lose weight sometimes because they're trying and they're working on their health, or they lose weight because they have cancer, right? Or they're depressed. So there's a lot of reasons why people lose weight. Sometimes it's unintentional. In fact, you know, it can be associated with depression. So I just want to bring this up now, to comment on anyone's body shape in general and size in general is inappropriate and potentially hurtful, even if you mean well. And that's really where it becomes difficult, is even when you mean well. Any comments about that?
Yeah, I think it's a problem because I think the people who comment on it, they don't realize that could be sensitive for that person. Like, for example, when I was in elementary school, I still remember the exact person who said I was fat when I was like in 4th grade. So, you know, of course they were young, they were my age, they didn't realize, but I still remember that. And so I always get really nervous when I overhear someone commenting on like a younger sibling's like weight, or some younger like child who they're still growing into their bodies. So it's just not really, I mean, of course we care about their health, but just not letting them hear those comments is more important than I think people realize.
I agree. And I'll get to this at the end, but one of the solutions too is, as responsible adults, we don't make negative comments about other people or about our own selves. I think sometimes girls are experienced, or boys are experienced, their parents making negative comments about their own image, like, oh, I'm too fat, I don't wear this, I don't wear swimsuits, whatever type of comment people make can be internalized by the child. So it's good for us to start with accepting our own bodies. Most of us don't look like models. And as you see from those videos, models don't even look like models, right? Yet, so it's an impossible standard. Okay, so let's keep going here. So now we're talking about anorexia in particular. And notice this image. This is such a useful one. So here's how she really looks. And here's what she sees in a mirror. Okay, so this is number 3, which is disturbance in the way in which one's body shape, weight, or shape is experienced. And this has a big effect on her lives. And this is an actual fact, that people with anorexia see this, although they're at risk for starvation. So these are the diagnostic criteria, and that's what I mean by this is how we define anorexia nervosa. So restriction of energy intake relative to requirements, and they lead to low body weight. In the context of the age section and development. So sometimes a 10-year-old girl may start restricting, and that may stop her from developing physically. This has happened before. So she won't develop breasts, she won't get enough fat tissue in order to start her menstrual cycle. So it can happen like that. And so it depends on the age of the person as to what symptoms you're looking for. We used to have, in the section before this, in the DSM-4, we said that losing the menstrual cycle was one of the diagnostic criteria. But they took that away. One reason is because a lot of people take birth control that really eliminates the menstrual cycle in general. And then also because it's not necessarily diagnostic. So it's this weight loss depending on the age, okay? And here's an intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat even though underweight. So we're talking about an obsession. And at the same time, again, not accurately perceiving one's own body shape. So this is a hodgepodge of signs and symptoms. Not everyone will exhibit these, but these give you a general idea. Significant weight loss. Some people are involved in food rituals. I actually went to school with someone I guess I'm around 13 or 14 years old. And we lived in Seoul, Korea at the time, so I was not in an American public school situation. But her mother was very thin and obsessed with that, and so she was also obsessed. And we didn't know about eating disorders at all. I didn't learn about this until a decade after that. But she would work very hard to stay very lean, and she did lots of things with food. Like she would make big batches of chocolate chip cookies and never eat them, but they'll go give them to people. And then, do other things. So obsessing with food, obsessing food, she would make milk, she would get powdered milk. There wasn't fresh milk at the time in Seoul, but powdered milk and fraud that all up and make, it had like 90 calories or something. And then that would be your meal. And so the ritual can happen. Distorted body image and weight gain, we've already talked about. So preferring to eat alone. I had a student several years ago that confided me about her eating disorders. It's been a couple decades, and it was really, really interesting to work with her on this. And she was able to get out of anorexia when she was anorexic. When I met her, she was probably 22, and her body looked like that of a 10-year-old girl. She had no breasts or no secondary sex characteristics that were evident from that. And then she was very rigid, didn't only wanted to eat alone. She wanted a reward and didn't want to go to the dinner, because she goes, they're going to ask me to order and I can't do that, right? And so she ended up getting over her eating disorder because she joined the Army, and the Army didn't allow her to maintain such a low weight. So it gave her a set of rules that she had to follow that helped her keep a healthy body weight. So I saw her after she graduated, like 3 years after that, and we met somewhere for dinner, met her dad and everything, and her comments were, look at me, I've got breasts now. So she was able to gain enough weight to get, meet her biological needs in order to be reproductive and so on, because the loss of a menstrual cycle due to starvation is an indicator of starvation. And I'll show you an indicator of risk for low body weight and low bone density and things like that. So, okay, also disturbances. A lot of people with anorexia are very cold, and they may wear lots of layers, so you can't really tell what their weight is like. And how serious is this? There's a risk for heart failure. What happens when so much energy the energy deficit gets so much that the size of the heart muscle gets smaller and her blood pressure can be low. And then sometimes if people then start treatment or eat a lot, it's the refeeding that can cause a heart attack. Okay, so there's that risk for heart failure because the heart muscle is too small and then not ready for all the calories and processing all the calories if a large amount of calories are consumed. Bones, teeth, and skin lose lower bone density, loss of teeth, hair loss, dry skin. Lanugo is a soft, downy-like hair. They may lose their hair, their regular hair, but develop sort of a layer of thin, downy hair like infants have. Become weak, kidney failure, decreased thyroid hormone, so it affects the endocrine system. They're cold, constipated because an abnormally feeling of fullness, so that things just aren't working right. It's also iron deficiency anemia due to iron deficiency. And then that's going to affect cognition. So people with long-term anorexia may even have Wernicke's encephalopathy. This is, you probably learned this before, this is a condition associated with alcoholism. And people with long-term anorexia can also have this where their brain structure changes and becomes smaller and have less gray matter. And because of the iron deficiency and the lack of calories, they have a reduction in neurotransmitters. So they're hard to work with when they're clinically in the middle of this condition. They're hard to work with because the rationality is not there as much because of reduced neurotransmitters. And I just looked up the death rate. Anorexia is the most dangerous eating disorder, and the death rate is about 5.9%, which is really high. So anorexia is dead serious. So, as just said, it has the highest mortality rate. And for females 15 to 24 who suffer from anorexia, the mortality rate associated with the illness is 12 times higher than death rate of all other causes of death. So it's very, very serious when people develop this. So you may have seen this before in other classes, but associated with anorexia is the female athlete triad. So the triad is disordered eating, menstrual irregularity, and decreased bone mineral density. So disordered eating, not getting enough calories, either dieting or over-exercising or both. And so then body size decreases, not enough calories. This can lead to lower estrogen, and that's going to affect the menstrual cycle. And estrogen helps maintain bone density. So without enough estrogen, then bone density decreases. Okay, so menstrual regularity and then decreasing bone density. This can lead to osteoporosis. Now, what's so serious about this is adolescence is the time where bone density increases are most robust. And it's a time where our bodies really need to be laying down hard, good, dense bone tissue, because after about age 30, bone density goes down. So we have adolescence is an important time to develop a strong skeleton. And if disordered eating is the problem here, the bone density of people with a couple of years of eating of anorexia nervosa is similar to that of a 60-year-old woman. So they can just lose the benefit that you get from laying down bone density during adolescence. Okay, so the next category is bulimia nervosa. And again, these are the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. They include recurrent episodes of binge eating. So that's eating a lot, and this is eating in a discrete amount of time, such as within 2 hours, a large amount of food, accompanied by a sense of lack of control over overeating during such an episode. So they have episodes, they feel lack of control and they eat too much. And along with this is recurrent inappropriate compensatory behaviors, such as purging or inducing vomiting. Laxatives and other things like that can be used too. Binge eating and these compensatory behaviors occur at least once a week for 3 months. So why do we have a timeline on here? We have a timeline because if someone just does this once a month or once, then they don't really follow the criteria of having bulimia nervosa, but they still got disordered eating. So you'll see in a minute when we get to the last category, there's kind of a catch-all category for people that don't fall directly under these criteria. So for someone to be diagnosed with bulimia nervosa, then they have overeating, lack of control, the compensatory behavior, and these behaviors occur on average at least once a week for 3 months. Self-evaluation is unduly influenced by body shape and weight, so people feel like their body shape and weight are more important than anything else about them. And this disturbance does not occur just during episodes of anorexia nervosa. In other words, bulimia nervosa is the overeating and purging. Sometimes people with anorexia will starve for a long time and then eat a lot, and then starve and then eat a lot. So if they're doing that, they don't have bulimia too. They're cycling in and out of anorexia, but bulimia nervosa is not characterized by the starving. Okay, it's characterized by the binge eating. So there are some signs and symptoms, and talking to people that actually work with individuals with eating disorders, this is a classic look at what happens with someone that's constantly or vomiting on a daily basis, where the acidity of the contents comes up and stomach contents can eat away at the teeth. And then here's Russell signs, which are signs of people inducing vomiting. People can develop the ability to vomit without putting their hands down the throat. Okay, so that's one way they start, but oftentimes they can just conjure it up without that. Having said this, you don't always see this, right? People can have bulimia nervosa without having obviously messed up teeth that haven't been eroded so much. So, but dentists may be in the first line of diagnosis. If they're working with someone, they may notice this before anybody else does. So another sign might be the excessive exercise, trying to work on body weight. So what's so bad about bulimia? Well, dehydration with the purging. And because of the purging, electrolyte imbalances and can cause irregular heartbeat and heart failure. Also, because of the binging, the esophagus and the stomach can actually rupture. Esophagus can become inflamed, and the stomach can also rupture. This has happened before. Instead of, people can eat thousands of calories in a couple hour period of time. Also associated with ulcers and irregular bowel movements, and then pancreatitis. Okay, so that's bulimia nervosa. Now here's another condition that's just like it, except for the purging. Okay, so binge eating disorder, this is the same as for bulimia nervosa. The binge eating, characterized by eating too much in a discrete period of time and a sense of lack of control. And so this is the same as for bulimia nervosa, but instead of having purging as being one of the criteria, people with binge eating disorder are associated with 3 or more of the following, which is eating much more rapidly than normal, eating until they feel uncomfortably full, eating large amounts of food and not feeling physically hungry, eating alone because they feel embarrassed, and feeling disgusted with oneself. So also, for this to be, someone to fall in this category, it's not associated with bulimia nervosa. In other words, they're not purging. They don't have anorexia at the same time. Binge eating disorder is just the overeating with 3 of those 5 categories. So what, look at pictures like this and think about, this is the American food supply. And I know many of us know better than to eat meals like this, but our society, we've gotten so used to eating all the time. We eat for entertainment, we eat when we go in the car, we, walking up and down the street. We used to have regular meals, and people eat a lot now, and what's available oftentimes is very unhealthy foods. It's really hard for people. So having binge eating disorder, this is the list that you have seen throughout your education here at Texas State about the comorbidities associated with obesity, because binge eating disorder can lead to obesity. And along with that is this elevated risk for type 2 diabetes, osteoarthritis, lipid abnormalities in blood, high levels of LDL cholesterol, for example, high blood pressure, kidney problems, GI problems, heart disease, gallbladder disease, pain, and sleep apnea. And we talked about sleep apnea with children earlier, but adults, of course, can also get sleep apnea. And again, it's having too much fatty tissue around the neck area that can compress the capacity to breathe. And so people stop breathing regularly throughout the night. And so they'll go to sleep, wake up, go to sleep, wake up. And they may not even know they're doing this, but when the morning happens, they don't feel rested at all and they're uncomfortable. It's because of the sleep apnea. Some people get it diagnosed, but not everybody does. So any comments about bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder? Are the differences clear to you?
Well, while you've been like going over all of the eating disorders, it made me remember something. So I hope I'm not the only person who knows who this is, but the singer Mama Cass, I watched a documentary about the mamas and the papas, and something so interesting to me was that, as you probably know, she's like a very large woman her entire life, but she actually died. So she died of a heart attack, and people probably, the first thing they think of is that she died because she was large. But the reason she actually died is because she crash dieted constantly throughout her entire career. And that's actually what led to her heart failure. So to me, it's interesting that, you know, when you look at somebody, all you see is their weight. You don't really know like what eating disorders are going on behind the scenes. So she actually endured long periods of malnutrition, which is what led to her death, even though she was overweight.
And that's a great observation. Other people that have suffered from their eating disorders and died. Karen Carpenter, do you remember her story? It's a long time ago, but she was anorexic and died from refeeding syndrome. So you're right. Yeah, I can't really emphasize this enough, but you don't know what's going on in anybody's life, right? Personally, what trials and tribulations they're going through, how they feel about their body weight, and it's very presumptuous to be judgmental. And it's great if we can stop doing that. We can definitely make the world a better place by not focusing on the physical looks so much. It's interesting though, because people defend their habits too. Now, let me tell you a sports nutrition story. This is really a good illustration. So many years ago, a colleague of mine and I were asked to go talk to the girls' soccer teams and at the university about nutrition because they were trying to figure out what to eat, right? Because they didn't know what to eat. And now they have some help, but they didn't know what to eat. And so they were, some of them were having issues with weight gain and they were running all the time and didn't know, how do I eat the right amount of calories and foods in order to have this energy that I need without overeating. So we went and did that. And we were very careful with our language. I hope this comes across sometimes when I'm speaking. What I try to do is model appropriate use of language where you don't say anything pejorative, you don't say anything negative, you speak with compassion and respect. And that's something that we always want to do. And so we were approaching our discussion with these girls, or they were college girls, young women, and some of the coaches were there. And one of the coaches said, she pointed to one of the girls and she said, well, what about spot reducing? Because this girl over here has a spare tire. And how can she get rid of that? So what happened is complete pandemonium. The poor girl she was overwhelmed with being pointed out and being talked about negatively and ran screaming from the room. And that's a kind of comment that can trigger eating disorders. I know that seems like who would say that, but people have said that. And even now coaches say things like that may be a little more nuanced with it. And there's some sports that make people feel more at risk. So gymnastics and running and things like that, people are more comfortable talking about weight in such a way that it's negative. Another thing I want to get at is the food environment. We have power over the food environment, but it may not seem like it. But I want to talk about this a little bit. So at Texas State, I've been there 3 decades. Texas State, I was a nutrition lead on our university employee wellness program. So in 2015, our university president funded permanently employee wellness program where we offer 25 exercise classes a week and also nutrition education and counseling and so forth. And as part of my work, I decided to conduct research on the quality of foods offered at mandatory meetings. So there was no research done anywhere in the world like this. So what we did is I felt like every time I had to go to a meeting, all there was junk food. So I would go and I couldn't get a salad because it would always be pizza. And, I like pizza like everybody else, but sometimes we'd have several meetings a month, and my health is not okay if I eat pizza several times. It's just not. I gain weight, and there's too much saturated fat, and it's not a choice, and so on. And so what we wanted to do is characterize what was there. So we did do that, and the way we did it is we talked to accounting and downloaded all the receipts that were used to buy food for all of the mandatory meetings for employees on campus for a year. We went through all those receipts, and the ones that we could determine what was ordered, we classified the types of food that was there. And we found that at a third of meetings, for example, sodas were available, and half of meetings had desserts available, and the common foods were the things that you would expect. And so it was almost impossible in most cases to put together a healthy meal. Breakfast sometimes was okay, because sometimes it would have breakfast tacos, and even though there's some non-imperfect things about the perfect diet, breakfast tacos still provide some some health and satiety, and they're not just dough, right? And so we characterized all this. So then we developed a study to educate people that order foods on campus on how to educate more healthfully. And I worked through our school, School of Family and Consumer Sciences, and put pressure on our director and my colleagues to so that we would agree to have only healthy foods, or at least have majority of healthy foods, so that people, instead of the default being unhealthy food like you see here on this slide, the default's healthy food. And several people in the school at the time, several of the employees had these types of conditions: overweight, obese, type 2 diabetes, and so forth. And I got an awful lot of pushback. So some people were in agreement with me, but many of them said, leave our cupcakes alone. We want H-E-B cupcakes. We want this. We want this. We want the pizza. We don't want to change. So apropos to nothing, I'm just saying it's hard, because if the food in your environment is healthy and you're not exposed to all this stuff, your diet's going to be better. So if the default at these meetings is a sandwich on whole wheat bread and with a moderate amount of cheese and some fruit as a side instead of donuts, and so forth, then we can eat a healthy diet, and it adds up and it affects our health for a long period of time. And we tend not to overeat as much. What makes us overeat is these salty, fatty, floury type combinations, especially carbs and fat and salt. And you know that, right? Those are the delicious foods. If they're desserts or these chips or items like this, and these are things that people are more likely to binge on. People typically that do binge eating typically don't binge eat on, I don't know, tuna salad, or even though it's not a perfect choice, but they binge eat on these processed packaged foods and high calorie, high fat foods. So having those available makes it very hard for people who struggle with eating disorders and struggle with their health. But it's interesting about the pushback. Any thoughts about that? Or the education went over very well. I had a graduate student, actually your GA, Kristen Wilmoth, volunteered as an undergraduate to work with a graduate student on this project, and they developed a series of 6 videos to educate people that order food on how to do it right, and how to keep into account calories and food allergies and so on and so on.
I have actually. A couple years ago, I used to compete in bodybuilding shows, and I actually, when I stopped doing it, I struggled with binge eating disorder. And so, it would literally be I would eat my meal plan, and then towards the end of the night, I would just start binge eating on Oreos. At one point, I think I finished a whole box of Oreos by myself, and it just couldn't stop. And so I would feel guilty the next morning, and I would be okay, let me go work out, start all over again. And then that night it would happen all over again, and it was constant, to the point where a month later I had put on 30 pounds, and I went from weighing 110 to 140, and I felt so guilty. And I think, it took like 2 years for me to feel comfortable to just like go out to eat with friends or like anything like that. So yeah.
So thank you. So do you feel like the emphasis, because we have such an emphasis on, you're in a sport where everybody looks at you, right? And that emphasis on the unachievable perfection in life was a big factor.
It was really hard because I feel like once you see yourself at like a certain body fat percentage, like you feel like that's obtainable and it's not something that like you can hold on to for a whole entire like year. And it's very unhealthy. I even like suffered a long time with like even just thinking straight because I didn't have like enough fat in my diet or calories in general. I remember like I know you had said, a certain amount of calories that children eat is what like 1200, 1300, and that's like a normal amount of calories a bodybuilder would eat every single day on top of like doing so much um so much cardio. So it was really hard for me to like start eating normal at all for the longest, and it like had gotten to the point where like I had to like stop grocery shopping for certain foods because if I had it in my household, like I would eat it.
Yeah, I think that's such a really good point. If we have it in our household, we'll eat it. And also, if we're starving, we think about those things. That's what addiction is, right? Basically, someone has an opioid addiction and they don't have their opioids, they think about their opioids, right? And so it's the same wiring in the brain that makes us crave junk food and crave food, and we crave it, especially when we're under eating, and also that food has been labeled as something you shouldn't have, right? And so then it becomes hard to eat a normal amount of it because we're all going to die someday, so we should have desserts. And that's my theory. We shouldn't spend our life eating the perfect diet because you should be close, you should do the best you can, and then you should calm down a little bit because eating pleasure is part of what we do too. It's just when it gets to the point where it affects our overall self-esteem and health and everything that the problem. It's hard to balance. So, if the work environment, the school environment, or wherever you guys end up working, you have power to try to improve the nutritional quality, and most people will be happy. Most people were happy with my initiative to improve foods on campus. Most people were, in fact, friends, their faculty and other programs would send me pictures of the food that they brought for meetings and go, here, look at all the salads we have, look at all this. And so people embraced it, but there were also people that got mad and wanted their stuff. So anyway, thank you for your comments. That it's not easy.
Professor, I have a question. Sorry,
Yeah.
to add on to what Brittany was saying, because I struggle with the same thing sometimes where I feel like I can't have certain foods in my house because I have no self-control, right? So I just make a choice not to even buy them. Is that still considered unhealthy? Because I would love to be able to have the self-control to have snack foods in my house and not always be constantly like worried that I'm just gonna have, something happen, like a stressful moment, and then just go reach for a snack. Like, do you think that that's still, that people should try to get past that, or that coping mechanism of just not buying those foods, is that good enough?
No, that's
Does that make
not
sense?
good enough. That's great. That's a great solution, right? So you allow yourself to have treats from time to time, but since you can't keep them in the house, don't keep them in the house, right? And studies show we do need to, all of us mostly need to improve our diets. And studies show that if we have packaged foods and junk food and stuff like that, then it's really hard for us to improve our diet if we have those things in the house. So if most of the food we eat requires preparation, most of the food we eat requires preparation, then our diets are better. We eat less sodium, our nutritional profile is better, and we eat less sugar and salt and all fat and all those things. So I think it's a great strategy. And quite frankly, I'm the same way. I don't keep anything yummy in the house. I'll go eat it. Sometimes I go to my daughter's house and they have stuff and they make fun of me because I'll go and go, what do you have? Because it's a treat. But I don't have it at the house because I'll eat all of it too. So it's for me, it's just a coping strategy too. But then you have to have good enough healthy food that doesn't take forever to prepare so that you've got things that you can eat, because starving is always going to be counterbalanced, right? That's always going to, you're going to have a rebound when you starve. So we don't want to rebound. Have enough food. You feel satisfied and you're comfortable, but in learning the tightrope between how much is enough food and how much is not enough and how much is too much takes a little time, and it's very personal for everyone because everybody has a different metabolism and different preferences. But I think it's a good strategy, right? And also, we talked about kids in the beginning, and it helps if we try to have a perfect diet for children in the house and we never give them anything. A lot of times, once they find out that their friends have Cocoa Puffs, then they go and gorge on things, right? And so moderation of all things seems to be the healthiest thing to do. Like mostly healthy food. Here's why. Here's it. Model it, eat it, and then model treats. Hey, it's Friday. We get ice cream and watch a movie on Friday, or something like that. So we don't assign magical properties or to tasty, to those foods. They're not forbidden. I think part of the issue with bulimia is their foods are forbidden, and that's the kind of stuff that people tend to eat too much of.
Professor, I have a question, and this might be splitting the hairs between nutrition related and psychology related, but I've noticed that there's been a big trend towards going vegetarian or vegan in an effort to lose weight, not necessarily with the the other political or whatever views towards it. Is that still considered an eating disorder at that point because it's restrictive eating?
No, thank you for asking. We're going to get to that. So let me go ahead and keep talking, and we're going to get to the thing called orthorexia. And if that doesn't get at what you're talking about, then ask me again, okay? Then I think we have this kind of set up. So we're in this category now of other specified feeding or eating disorders. And you don't have to know this acronym, just know that there's another category, right? And what this category is kind of like a catch-all for eating disorders that don't fit easily into anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder. In other words, they don't meet all the diagnostic criteria for those. There's still evidence of disordered eating. So this is a lump, okay? One is a typical anorexia nervosa, so they meet the criteria except the weight's normal, right? So they meet all the other behaviors and so forth. Bulimia nervosa of low frequency and limited duration meets the categories, but they don't binge eat as often. Okay, so the binge eating is still there, it's just not as often. And then in purging too. So then binge eating disorder of low frequency and limited duration, same thing. They just don't meet the once a week for 3 months category. Two other categories in this umbrella: purging disorder, people just purging, such as vomiting, laxatives, medications, but they don't binge eat. Okay, so this is another category. And then night eating syndrome. So this is recurrent episodes of night eating, and people know they're not sleepwalking, right? They know they're getting up and they know they're eating, and they don't have something else going on. They just get up and eat, and it causes stress and impairment of functioning, and it doesn't fall into the other category. So I find this one to be quite interesting. Some people, I read up on it before the lecture today, but some people are concerned that they can't make it through the night with food, and so get up and eat another meal. And it's considered night eating syndrome, so it's in the DSM-5. And I don't know much about the treatment of this, except all of these are mental disorders. So this is, Laura, getting at what you were asking about. Orthorexia. This is not in a DSM-5, but we all know that people get weird about food, and I shouldn't really put it that way, but we all know that people struggle with eating because of all these stresses on us, how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to be, majoring in nutrition. Everybody asks you, the family, you're supposed to be perfect and you're not. And so orthorexia is an obsession with healthy or righteous eating. And these are, it can be vegetarians or vegans that are eating it for trying to get a perfect diet, whatever it is. Some of the paleo diet, people feel like they can create a perfect diet with a paleo diet too, where they have a fixation on what's healthy and won't go outside that. So everything is perfectly healthy. They don't even trust somebody else to prepare their foods. And when people get restrictive like this, it may morph into anorexia. Now back to your question about vegetarian vegan diets, I find a vegan diet to be problematic because you're going to have trouble with getting adequate nutrition. Omega-3 fatty acids are a big problem. Iron and zinc can be a big problem, and so forth. Calcium, vitamin D. But so the vegan diet's a problem, but the vegetarian diet can be quite healthy. It can also be quite unhealthy, right? Depending on the types of choices people make. So I don't necessarily call those disordered eating unless there's elements of this going in here where the idea is that everything has to be perfect.
Is tracking your food considered a disorder?
No,
Like food
that's a great thing to do, honestly, because we all struggle with our environment. And many people, mostly what happens to adults is they gain weight through their entire life after adulthood. So I used to, when I talk in person to students, I would say, you're probably, your weight is affected now by what you eat, and also the fact that you're walking all over campus, and then you may go work out, you may do this and this and this. And what happens is people leave school and then they go get a sedentary job, and it's not the same. Energy balance is not the same, right? So it's hard to maintain a healthy weight, and you have to actually work at it, and that's healthy. It is healthy to work on maintaining a healthy weight. I'm not talking about just letting things go. What we're trying to get away from is obsession, right? And so tracking is great because then people realize, oh, wait, I know why I'm gaining weight all the time. It's this one habit or these two habits that are easy for me to change, and I still like my diet and I still get to eat good things. So one of an app that I think is really helpful for people that are wanting to lose weight in a healthy way is Noom. I bet a lot of y'all have heard of Noom because it's advertised. Okay, it's Noom. It is advertised pretty heavily on social media and other places. And I have recommended it to several people, and they rave about it. And it allows for food tracking in an easy way. So you can enter in your food and how much, and it'll tell you about where your calories are. You tell them your weight loss goal, and you track it, you weigh every day and you track it. But the whole message is healthy. And by healthy, I mean, be easy on yourself. Realize that you have some cravings. Enjoy those foods. Everything you have to eat does not need to be spinach and salmon and brown rice. You can eat a variety of things, but in the grand scheme of things, you want the bulk of things you eat to be in a healthy category. So Noom has people track, and studies have shown for people that want to maintain healthy weight, food tracking is a really good thing to do. That's not obsessive. We have to worry about nutrition. We're all in this together, so it does matter. It's just when body weight concerns take over our world, right? The message is lost.
Professor, there's a question in the chat.
See, I can't see the chat line. Let me get to that in a minute because I can't see the chat when I'm presenting. That's why Kristen works on Thursdays, but I'll get to that. Okay, we'll stop and I'm almost done with this lecture, and then I'll look and see. So what is this? It's fixation on the right foods, all this. We've already talked about that. There's a couple more disorders I want to get at. These are not eating disorders, but you may know about them. One is body dysmorphic disorder. People are concerned about one's appearance, and they pick something that they're concerned about, and either it's slight or it's imagined, and they're preoccupied with it to the extent that it affects their lives. So dysmorphia, they don't like the shape of their body, and they're preoccupied with it to the extent that it's a mental disorder. Now, we bring this up in this lecture because associated with this might be disordered eating. And there's also muscle dysmorphia, where you remember the image I showed of the very thin girl looking at herself in the mirror, seeing something that different than how she is. Same thing here. it's a form of body dysmorphic disorder where people feel like they're not muscular enough, they're undersized. And so so warning signs are people feel they don't like themselves, self-loathing about how they look, not satisfied. We all can only make as many muscles as we can make, right? There's a finite capacity, and some people have low numbers of muscle tissue, some people have more. Everybody's different with this. You can only do so much, and yet some people spend their lives focused on maximizing muscle mass, and yet they can't really get there. And in cases to the image that they have, he can't get to this image, right? If this is him, he can't get here. And yet if he's here, he sees this. And so it's an unrealistic expectations, probably pretty much like that video I showed about all the here she comes and all those images. Same thing with guys and other women too, with the expectation of being muscular. Now, what do we want to do? We actually want to get at prevention. Okay, and that's parents can be role models, so can coaches. Trust me, we talked to that coach after that meeting, and they need training working with children. So be careful about your own attitudes. Don't use food as a reward or punishment. It is so easy for parents to do this. Don't criticize your own shape and weight status. Do not equate food with positive and negative behavior. Become a critical consumer of media, so you guys are being marketed to. Be aware of the eating disorder warning signs. If you see it in your children, don't support activities that depict people as objects. Help children accept and enjoy their bodies and being physically active. Discourage the idea that a particular diet or body size will lead to happiness, because it doesn't. And trust your children's appetites. Let them eat. Sometimes it's pushing them to eat more and restricting them that helps generate that cycle. So we go back to what we said about Ellen Satter, which is a job of a parent to provide the healthy foods, what and when, and it's a job of the child to decide what to eat and how much, and we let them eat, right? So lack of not controlling. So here's some good resources. So let me see if I can, let's see, I'm going to stop my share. Yeah, then I can start seeing things like the chat. When I've got the share going, you guys, I can't see the chat. Oh yeah, bigger movement for cosmetic surgeries, like I've been seeing many other people trying to get cut. Yes, absolutely. Is orthorexia a new type of disordered eating? It's not. It is a type of disordered eating. It's not in the DSM-5, so it's mushy. This is not considered an official eating disorder. However, we recognize it, so someday it may be in there, but right now it's not considered an official eating disorder. So I'm open to comments here. This is all the content I have to say, but oftentimes this lecture can be meaningful to people because we all suffer from expectations and sort of so much influence on how looks matter when there's so many more things that matter in life besides body shape. But it's not easy for people. Any comments?
I just want to know, like, when does an RD get involved?
Thank you. And I used to have slides on this. You're part of a team. Okay, so some dietitians are part of the team. So in the team, there will be a counselor, a psychiatrist for medication, and a dietitian. The dietitian is a nutrition educator and can work with, here's how many calories you need, and do all those calculations and help with that. So just as part of a team. And if you're really interested in doing this work, you can get a co-degree. In fact, people can achieve the RD credential now. You know, it's going to be requiring a master's degree. You can get an undergraduate degree in nutrition, a master's degree in social work, and become an RD, and then you can treat. And there are people that dietitians that also are counselors, licensed professional counselors or social workers that can work with people. So there's a lot of need there.
I have a question. Do you find that there's an increase in eating disorders and disordered eating patterns, or do you think maybe that it's just that more people are actually being open about it now? Because I agree that social media and the like are influencing children and teenagers, well, a lot of age groups, to think about their body in a negative way. But do you think it's increased, or do you think it's the same and it's just that more people are being more open about it at this point?
No, it's increased. It's increased the diagnosis, right? So they're going by number of people diagnosed per capita. And so that's what those numbers say, that the increase is happening, is increase in diagnosis. But you know, anorexia is hard to hide. The other ones can sometimes be hidden. All right, well, thank you so much for attending class today. I'll get this lecture posted for you, and on Thursday we'll begin talking about older adults. So we'll start on the very last section of the course.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.